Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We've got, we're still getting the odd person coming through, but we've got 73, 74 people in the group now. So thank you for coming to our first webinar for the Future Funding Programme. We are joined by Crystal Vittles from Suffolk Libraries as well, who's going to be talking a little bit further on about a service that she's been delivering around meeting the health and well-being outcomes of her community. And what I wanted to do first was just kind of take you through a bit of an background to where Future Funding is. This is the first of these webinars, so a bit of what Future Funding is about and why we're doing it and what the structure of it is. I have to apologise as well. I've managed to get it set up so I can't actually see the notes that I've written alongside my presentation, so I'm trying to remember them and sort of see if I can see them on my phone at the same time. So basically, Future Funding is an Arts Council funded, Arts Council England funded programme. It is funded by Arts Council England, which means it's technically limited to English library services, but we are offering the publicly accessible bits, so things like this and access to the toolkit and all those kind of things to the broader membership of Libraries Connected, so to Wales. Sorry, I think I've just been muted by mistake. So yeah, we're offering the broader public-facing bits to Wales, Northern Ireland, and also to Scotland as well. But the specific access to the skills development programme is limited to English library services at the moment, though we're talking to Wales and Northern Ireland to try and work out how we can get that part of it as well. So the aims are basically threefold. So to improve commercial skills across the sector through skills sharing and skills development. And one of the critical things I think there is about skills sharing as well, because one of the things that we're really, really keen to highlight and celebrate, I suppose, is that there's a huge amount of commercial knowledge and expertise already in the sector. There's lots of exciting activities and projects going on, lots of services that are being delivered, and lots of income that is being generated. Some of this is limited to certain areas, some of it's limited to certain targets, some of it's limited. And so the idea of this is to take those skills, take that experience and share it across the sector and really kind of focus on what's working for the library services. The second bit is about identifying shared opportunities for income generation. So look at what we can do to start to use our regional and national leverage as library services and library sector to start to develop those kind of things. So one of the examples, I suppose, of that is the visa service that we're operating through Sopra Steria. And that's been a great opportunity for some of the libraries who've been part of that. And it's one of those things that I think works very, very well depending on the conditions within the library service and the way it's been approached and how it fits with local need, local skills, local experience and things as well. So the idea is to identify more opportunities like that so that library services can identify and choose one that is going to be more suitable for their own services as well. And then create toolkits to support local and regional income generation activities. So we've started to use some of these tools already. So there's two toolkits. There's a strategic one and a practical one. Within the practical toolkits, we've developed a few things already, including something that we use to evaluate opportunities. So a tool to support us doing that. And we use that for the census opportunity that came out last year. And we've also got something coming out over the next week or so, which is a tool, a template business plan for an iPad lending scheme, which can then be used and rolled out. It's already been used within Newham libraries. So the structure of the programme, it's got four key parts. There's the whole sector input, so the public-facing side of it, and that's got two main bits. One's this webinar series, and the second is the income generation group. I think a lot of us are already on the income generation network, and that ties in with the webinar series. And following this webinar, there'll be discussion on that group. There's then a toolkit development. So there's two toolkits. There's a strategy toolkit, which is essentially the development of the model that we're going to be talking about today. And then there's a practical toolkit, which will have practical templates in it such as the how to evaluate an opportunity tool, the developing and creating a that template plan for iPad lending scheme, and similar things to that. And then also things that go into more detail about sort of a full cost recovery budget and that kind of thing. Alongside that, there is a skills development program. And so far we've procured the delivery partner and we've begun the development of that program with a Pathfinder group. So we're delivering that with NCVO, the National Consortium of Voluntary Organisations. And the way we've structured it is we have a Pathfinder group of 12 library services, some of which are here today, which is brilliant. In fact, Crystal is representing one of them as well, although she's not the person on the Pathfinder group. And they're going through a very draft version of the program and testing it out, bringing in additional activities and information to then have a fully formed program that we can then deliver at the end of that. So we'll be looking at that in about July or August. So that will start, and there will be 3 cohorts for that. So there'll be 3 cohorts of about 12 people each. So there's a space for another 36 library services to be part of that too. If there's additional demand, we can also look at broadening that out as well. And then there's a mentoring program that's still in development. We're currently using the capacity of the mentoring program to support the people within the Pathfinder group as part of their development of that program. So that's the 4 bits. We've got the whole sector input of this webinar series in the income generation group, the toolkit development was a strategy and practical toolkit, the skills development program, which will be coming out of the Pathfinder stage, sort of in the middle of this year, and then the mentoring program, which will be launching for the wider cohorts, again, sort of towards the middle of this year. So what we're wanting to talk about here is a donut model. So the model of, yeah, so a donut model. So this model of donut economics has been developed by an economist called Kate Raworth, who developed it in Oxfam initially, and subsequently published as a book called Donut Economics, which I think many of us might be familiar with. The specific application of it, here, is as part of a thriving city plan for the Amsterdam city region. And what we've done is we've lifted part of that to see how it would work and how we can apply it to the library sector and the income generation work that we're doing around that. So the reason we've done that is because of the way it fits and because of the way it really is rooted in how we identify and locate libraries at the centre of community development and at the centre of local economic and individual development. You'll see this as we go further on as well. And there's a huge community starting to develop around donut economics at the Donut Economics Action Lab, which you might want to have a look at. I'll send the link out afterwards. And that's where there's quite a lot of collaborative development, but also there's examples of where it's being applied locally and regionally in the UK as well. So Cambridge and Bristol are looking at applying it. There's a national health donut for Wales. And so there's all of these things kind of coming out, and it feels like this is a useful time to use this tool and apply it. The tool that we're applying, I think one of the kind of key things that I always stick to is this idea that most tools are wrong, but some of them are useful. So I think with this tool here, it's well, with any tool, it will apply and it will have its limitations. And what we want to do is try and understand the limitations, but understand what we can get from it as well. So it's not going to be the be all and end all, but it's going to be a useful framework that will kind of guide our thinking through the program. So the core of donut economics is about balancing the needs of individuals and the resources that are available to the planet. So the idea is that we start with, within this circle, is the minimum amount of resources for any individual to be able to survive and thrive, have a decent life. And then outside of that, there are the resources and the restrictions on resources of what we can sustainably take from the wider ecology, whether that's the finance funding ecology, or in this case, kind of in the sense of from the wider environment as well. And the concept then of the donut is that this green space here is the place where it's sustainable ecologically, but everyone within that has the resources to live a dignified life and have all the resources to be able to thrive and explore their own sort of development of their own self. So what's happened in the development of the Amsterdam model is that they've looked at 4 areas within this, and they've divided it into 4. So looking at the resources required to make a community healthy, to make a community connected, make a community enabled, and to make it empowered as well. And so to achieve that, they've broken this up into further bits, further sections. So within connected communities, we're looking at making sure that everyone has resources that allow them to be that meet their connectivity needs. So do they have access to digital services? Do they have connections with friends? Do they have the right access to phone lines, all that kind of stuff? In terms of community, looking at how communities can work together. Mobility, do people have access to affordable, environmentally sustainable transport? And culture, do people have all the resources required to meet their cultural needs? And then in terms of being enabled, we're looking at jobs. Do people have access to the jobs that will provide them with a fulfilling employment? So not just about people having jobs, but also having the jobs that meet their needs, whether that's in terms of providing them the standard of living they need for their family, providing them with the flexibility and the time off to be able to look after children, or wider caring responsibilities, all of those kind of things. So a job that is suitable for those people. Income, so for people who are either in very low income jobs or not working at the moment, do people have the money, the income to be able to support themselves in a dignified way? Education, have people had the opportunity to access education to maximize their potential to work out what they want to do? All of these things are quite interrelated as well, you see. And energy, I mean, again, sort of energy is one of those things. When I initially looked at this model, I was thinking that's kind of not really got that much to do with what we could offer through libraries, but thinking it through, we've got quite a lot of things around the need for people to have affordable energy, and when people are actually looking at trying to change tariffs or access different things, they might need support and advice to be able to do that, and they also might need access to the internet to be able to do that. In terms of an empowered community, looking at peace and justice, do people have access to the justice system in the way that they need? Do they have access to legal advice? Do they have access to legal aid? And then social equity, do people have the same opportunities? Political voice, can people actually be heard? Do they know how to be heard? Do they know how to feed into local politics, national politics? Do they know how to understand how to represent their choices democratically? And equality and diversity as well. Does everyone have the same opportunities? What barriers are in place, and are those barriers things that the thriving city or thriving community can support people around, or remove those barriers? And then the final one's about being healthy. And health, I think one of the things on this is that some of these areas, so health feels like it's an enormous area, but kind of just to have it as one of a small quadrant of this feels almost limiting. But I think this might be one of the things we decide to develop with the model as we go through and expand some of these areas and have subsections as well. But we already know all the stuff that libraries can support in terms of health, and Crystal will be talking in a minute about that as well. Housing, can people afford the housing in their area? Do they have housing that meets their needs? Is it safe? All those kind of things. Do people have access to clean, fresh water? And then food as well. Do people have access to nutritional food? nutritious food, and do people have access to ways to create nutritious food, but also how does that link through to culture? Do people have access to the kind of foods that they're choosing, and the kind of foods that might reflect their culture and heritage as well? So what we do, this is slightly overcomplicated, this slide, but this is just an example of how we can link these things and these outcomes and these aims of what resources we feel people might need to different types of outcomes frameworks. So this outcomes framework here, around the outside, is outcomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the libraries deliver outcomes. So you'll recognize those from the Libraries Task Force. So for example, just looking at outcome 7, stronger, more resilient communities, that's the green thing here. And then all of these parts here that have been identified as green are the ones that kind of really link back to it. So we can see that there's a massive interlink with all of these different things. So this isn't necessarily providing a different framework, it's almost just providing a slightly different perspective at the same framework of outcomes. And so what we've also started looking at is how this links to other research that's coming out at the moment. So we've got this bit of research that's come out from Leeds University about how the UK could use donut economics to recover from COVID and the economic, social, and sort of individual impact of that. And they've come up with 4 key things. So one's about safeguarding basic needs, and that essentially covers a lot of these things, but the key things for me around that are basically around food, water, health, housing, and energy. Do people have those basic things in place? Empowering, protecting workers, so looking at jobs, income, but then also kind of the political voice and the peace and justice, so where people need to stand against dangerous or unfair employment practices. And then they're getting quite specific in terms of reducing exposure to debt crises and tackling rent extraction. So obviously these link back together as well. But what we find is that a lot of these different models are starting to essentially be able to map back onto this. And so this model, we're hoping becomes a model that is something that we can map a lot of the stuff that we're working with libraries about, but also one that really positions libraries at the center of local decision making, of local funding networks, and of local partnerships as well. So why are we choosing this model? I mean, there's a few things here. So first of all, it's at its core, it's quite an ethical model. So there are ethical choices built into it. I'm not saying that this covers off the ethical questions around income generation, because that's a huge issue which does require and will have ongoing discussions separate to this. But it really focuses on what we're trying to achieve for our communities. What can we achieve as library services individually or in partnership? And actually, that decision about what we want to do as library services or what we want to support partners to do is quite a big thing about maintaining our sense of libraries as libraries as well, rather than libraries as the be-all and end-all to all of society's ills, which would be great, but we would then not be libraries. And then how do we deliver that in a sustainably funded way? So the core to this really is about making sure that we can address our community's needs from the perspective of being libraries, but also make sure that it's sustainably funded. There's equity built into this as well. So what's the minimum our residents and communities need to thrive, and how, again, do we make that sustainably funded? The sustainable funding around this is also about sustaining the wider library services too. And then there's environmental sustainability built in. So looking at libraries as leaders, that responsibility to communicate communities, and future statutory obligations. I think that the couple of things I was thinking about environmental sustainability, while it doesn't seem specifically relevant, it feels ethically relevant. But I think just on a practical level, there are a few things that are happening. So if we're looking at increasing our income, we've got essentially one of 3 things we can do. We can increase our economic activity, we can increase what we charge for things, or we can increase the number of things we sell, essentially. And each of those will become more difficult as we become less and less environmentally sustainable. So if we're trying to increase our activity, that will be by reaching out to new customers. And as we know, that kind of customers are starting to become more and more environmentally conscious. Any any move towards environmental sustainability will support us in doing that. Similarly, reducing our costs is going to become more and more difficult if we are not environmentally sustainable, because there'll be more and more over the coming years as kind of the impact of climate change starts to crash around us, as in fact we're seeing right now, then there'll be more financial disincentives, more taxes and things like that that will prevent cost reduction if we aren't environmentally sustainable. But for the core of it, for me, basically, we should be being environmentally sustainable. And I think libraries as leaders in terms of information as well feels like that it's the right place to be positioned. And then encouraging broader thinking as well. So this model, I think, does also start to help us think, and these are discussions and conversations that are happening already, obviously. But what is a library for, and where is its place in society? And critically for me, it's about being able to put a model together which really embeds the library into the fabric of the local and national funding, service delivery, the economy, how people engage with the state, all of that kind of thing. If the library is at the heart of that, then it feels that secures our position and some of our funding as well for the future as well. So one thing that comes out of this as well is this distinction between generative economics and extractive economics. So traditionally, extractive enterprise is about how much financial value can we get from this? What do we do? What's our profit? Whereas generative enterprise is about what benefits do we get through doing this? And I think this is the kind of, this is where we're sitting within the library service, that idea of generative enterprise. What value to society are we creating by doing this? We're not wanting to go out there and sell things to make money. We're wanting to go out there and create additional value to society, while at the same time covering our costs and potentially generating surplus to then provide additional services within the library system. And then finally, this is just part of the model that's been considered for Amsterdam, and I think it might be worth us considering these further down the line. So what we've been looking at is, so just taking the Amsterdam thing, was that was about what would it mean for the people of Amsterdam to thrive. So looking at the local aspect and looking at the social aspect of it. So they've divided it into local and global, and then social and ecological. So looking at the local ecological bit is about how Amsterdam thrives within its natural habitat. So I think there will be lots of things that your local authorities will be doing around that anyway. But then the other bit's about what does it mean for the global social aspect of it? What does it mean for the region to respect the well-being of people worldwide? And there might be influence that the library services might be able to have on that in terms of promoting fair trade, in terms of fair purchasing and all those kind of things. And then global ecological as well. What would it mean for the region to respect the health of the whole planet? So how can we start to communicate those messages and engage people in supporting activities around, particularly around climate change, but around kind of wider ecological activities as well. So those other three quadrants are important to the model, but they're not our current focus of it. Our current focus is really about sort of like, how do we use the libraries within this model to support the development and now redevelopment and recovery of the regions that we're living in and operating in. So first of all, well, actually, I'll go on to these bits first, and then we'll come on to Crystal. So briefly, how we'll develop this model. We've got 3 current strands going through the income generation group. So the income generation group on Basecamp. We've got structured activities to populate and develop this donut model. We've got then discussion following the webinar topics. So we've got these webinars every fortnight, and the topics will change, obviously. So we've got this one, and then the next 2 continue that strategic look at income generation. And then the following 7 focus on specific areas such as Section 106 funding and SIL funding, and then another one looking at maximising income from room bookings, and those kind of things. So looking at much more specific areas. And following those, we've then got a fortnight of discussion between those, each of the different webinars. And then finally, discussion of what opportunities are available as well. So what opportunities are arising out of these wider discussions, but then also any other opportunities that come in. So how do we apply these? Are there other opportunities that are coming in and available to the library service that we might want to take a view on whether it's worth going for, whether we should go for it, what are the ethics around it as well? So those kind of things as well. So those three conversations are going on in the income generation group. And the first one is the one that is about developing this model. And the way we'll be doing it is this 4-phase thing. So first of all, looking at exploring what's currently going on, current activities across the library network, looking at the outcomes. So say we're looking at education, what's happening in education, what are the outcomes required or desired in terms of education. And actually these, from when we started thinking about this model 12 months ago, are very, very different. There's now massive gaps in terms of education that have widened up over the past year. Where are these outcomes not being met within the local society? What partners and stakeholders are there within this? So the partners and stakeholders might be people who would be able to support us deliver, or might be people we could influence to try and deliver in a different way, or they might be people who could support us with funding around it as well. And then how do we bring them all together? What business models and income recovery models allow for this? So that's essentially the process that we'll be doing through the income generation network. And later on today, we've got some workshop activities to look at that for 4 different areas as well. But first of all, I would like to hand across to Crystal Vittles, who's going to talk to us about the work that she's been doing in Suffolk, with Suffolk Libraries in addressing the health and wellbeing outcomes of communities.
Thank you, Ian. Are you going to pop my PowerPoint up, or?
I'm just sharing it now.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and thank you for having me today. I realise I only really have 10 minutes to talk through something which is quite a significant, I say significant, you know, our business. It is our business that I'm going to talk about. So 10 minutes will only scratch the surface. So I apologise if I leave you with any kind of knowledge gaps, or if I'm just talking gibberish. But please do feel free to come back to me with questions. So are you going to move my slides along, Ian, or can I do that? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, you're doing it for me. Thank you. So, like I said, I want to talk about our model, particularly the funded part of it. So we do have a lengthy track record of mental health and wellbeing funding in Suffolk Libraries, which predates us as a mutual organisation. It goes way back. In fact, I think it goes back even before the Section 75 agreement, which I'm going to talk about here. So it really is historic. So it does come with that health warning as such. So we were really building on something that was already there, which does put us at an advantage. So our current agreement and the agreement before that, and probably the one before that, because I think the Section 75 agreement has been around since mid-2000s actually. So if you're not familiar with that, that's pooled funding from local authorities, health bodies, which all comes together to parcel out to meet health needs in communities through other organisations. So what we have at the moment, our current contract, and this is a contract above and beyond the contract that we have with Suffolk County Council to deliver the library service, is a 3-year mental health and wellbeing contract with a +1 and a +1. So it's really a 5-year contract. And we're most of the way through this current contract at the moment. We're about 4 years in. So we're looking at that rebidding stage very soon. So our current contract, like I said, is 4 years, and it's actually a partnership, which we had a bit of a change around when we rebid for this particular contract, and they were looking for much more partnerships. It was a partnership bid with Suffolk Mind and Suffolk Family Carers, of which we are the overseeing body of that partnership. So the funding sits with us and we pass it out, and we do a lot of the admin as well, but also we have a particular funded post, of which I'll talk about more in a moment. And each of us as partners, we all have a different contribution to make to that partnership in terms of our outputs and what we're doing for communities. So our biggest contribution to that partnership is our open space model. And I don't really have time to go into that because I could talk about that for 3 or 4 hours, that particular model, but that's about modeling wellness in the community and work with a whole range of other partners for that, such as NSFT, which is Norfolk and Suffolk, NHS Foundation Trust, Richmond Fellowship, housing providers, a psychologist, etc. And it's about coming together in the library space. I can provide more information if you want to know about that at some point. So our particular brand of this is actually called New Chapters. So it's all very confusing, all these different names. You've got Sages, New Chapters. It makes sense in my head anyway, and hopefully to the customer, which is the most important thing. So New Chapters, if you go on our website, you can find that. And there's also a Sages website as well. So it is a significant sum of money, and it's hugely important to our agenda. Pulled together, I think it comes to about, and it's nearly £1 million contract over 4 years. That's split between us, and we get the lion's share of that because we provide a huge amount. Can I have the next slide, please? So why do we do this? So it's all about centering ourselves in the preventative health agenda. And I know that isn't a concept that's new to anybody around this virtual table. We're all doing that. But it fulfills our strategic aim and our ambitions to make life better. And, that's not just a glib phrase that we trot out. That's, that's why I do my job. It's all very, very Miss World, isn't it? I want to make life better, but I genuinely do. That's what we all want to do. And we have over 18,000 wellbeing inquiries a year. That's huge, and that comes through our frontline colleagues, that comes through our customer support, it comes through emails. It's a huge amount, especially considering that Suffolk doesn't actually have that many people for how big it is, to be honest. And another reason we do this, the dependency ratios in Suffolk are sky high. We are a weird place. So we have lots of older people as opposed to younger people. We have lots of people at that kind of critical end of poor mental health. So something's off in Suffolk. And what doesn't really help is that we work or live within where the trust, the mental health trust, is systemically flawed. It's actually the worst performing mental health trust in the country, and there's got successive leadership problems. And that's not to slate it, because individually everyone who works for NSFT have been an absolute fantastic, brilliant partner. But we know that we're fighting something here, and there have been some quite high level serious case reviews around this mental health trust. So we're acutely aware of the needs. So we also work to the Human Givens model. If you're not familiar with that, you can give it a quick Google, you'll find out about it. It's incredibly simple. It's about fulfillment by meeting needs. Everyone's on a continuum with different needs at different times, and you have to fulfill those needs. And, that really feeds into what Ian was just saying about the donut model as well. So we need communities to stay well and thrive, actually, which is what we want to do at that really low level preventative end of stuff, because we know everything is a determinant of health and well-being, and so which is why this work runs through everything we do. Next slide, please. So the community needs, I've touched on this already. We want to see a reduction in the reliance on clinical interventions in Suffolk. We really think that we can be part of, and we are part of that agenda, and also stopping that unchecked escalation. And it's really come to the fore in COVID times that people who have never been part of the system are now hitting the system at a critical point. So they're not even coming in later, that they're hitting there. So that means something's wrong. So while we're doing this, I'm not saying we've cracked it all. There's more that we need to do, but that's what we want to do. And, it goes back to the why. Why us? We can make a safe space. All of us as libraries can make a safe space for someone to make their first inquiry to a friendly face. If you've never been part of services before and you suddenly find yourself tipping over into mental ill health, that must be quite scary. There's a lot of pride issues, actually, especially with men, associated with admitting that you need to reach out for a bit of help. So we find that, our colleagues on the ground delivering the work are a really good place for someone to start, which leads to what I was saying about building trust. We know this, we're librarians in the room, you can trust us, we're really trustworthy, and we will provide that space, whether you want to talk or whether you just need to come in a few times, just sit and have a think, and then you can approach us for help. And then, like I said before, we want communities to survive and thrive. And we feel we can do that through an enabling way. So, you know, I'm not saying here that we are going in and providing all the answers for people, but we can enable them. So, you know, whether that's information, advice and guidance, or warm handovers, which I'll talk about in a minute, or, you know, providing more information for people. Can I have the next slide, please? So social prescribing, you know, we're in that space. It's the new thing, isn't it? But we know as libraries, we've been doing this for a long time, actually, in however you want to call it, or in some form. But you know what? We're playing the game. We're rebadging what we're doing to speak that funder's language. You know, we have to be opportunistic. And we're all quite good at that, I think. So we're taking what we do and we're just bundling it up as a specific offer, maybe rejigging things so we can make it look, or, you know, present to our funders like, actually, do you know, we are doing that, we are part of that. And I'm not saying that's been easy for us. It's been about having the same conversations over and over and over with the same people to get it through to them as what we're doing. And actually we're in a space now where it's suddenly clicked after 500 meetings. They're like, oh, Suffolk Libraries, social prescribing. Yes. So going forward, we are going to be part of that recognised county-wide offer. And, you know, we're hoping that opens up more funding opportunities for us. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about Sarah. Now, everything that we do around this space, you know, every single person in Suffolk Libraries is absolutely part of this. But I do want to pick out Sarah because she leads our function for mental health and wellbeing. She is our wellbeing manager. She's lovely, isn't she? Look at her picture. So Sarah's from a mental health background, and this is really important. I'm a bit of an evangelical about internal development, I think. Oh, have you changed my slide? I like to see internal development with staff. We like to have that internal talent pipeline. But actually with this role, I think it's really important that we have someone who comes from that space and really understands that. And Sarah has some clinical training. So yeah, it's really important that we have that. And, you know, she has been a person who's so important to this because she brings her own network, she brings her own thoughts and ideas of how we can join it up with libraries. And she's been on a learning journey herself to learn more about libraries in her role. And, you know, she works behind the scenes to make sure that the programme that we're funded for runs smoothly, to make sure the staff part of it runs smoothly, but also have those strategic conversations. So it's not just someone like me, someone like Bruce having those conversations, it's Sarah out there leveraging her connections, basically. And I've called her our compass. So she makes sure we're keeping well-being at the forefront of everything. And she really does that. She looks nice, but she can be really quite pushy if we're not doing, and quite rightly so, I think. So she's very good at that. Thank you. Next slide. So embedding, I think it's really, really easy with big projects, and it's something that we've grappled with our MPO project, actually, is about how do we embed it and make it part of what we are. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an added layer on top, it is what we do. So first and foremost, you've got to make sure that your teams, that your colleagues are trained, and as standard, we automatically take £5,000 from Sarah's budget each year, and that goes in the staff training pot. That's the minimum. And then throughout the year, Sarah and I, because I line manage Sarah and I oversee this service, so we have a look at her budget, see what's going on. Like, for example, during COVID times, there's been a bit of underspend. So actually, we've been able to plough a little bit more into some more interesting training. To be fair, actually, the training she does provide is hugely interesting with external partners. We've been on all kinds of journeys together. It's brilliant. We are able to take some overhead costs from that contract as well, because that's just the world we live in. We need to do that in order to wash our own face, really. But coming out of that, beyond what we're contracted to do around open space and the partnership, Sarah works really hard on creating wellbeing champions within the service. And that's for colleagues at any level to talk to someone about how they're feeling, if they need some support, some signposting. Sarah's really worked well with my colleague Paul and his stock team on books on prescription, which we're all familiar with. We've got our Pride and Periods service, which was just a conversation over a drink with Sarah one day. We're like, oh, we should probably do something. She was able to leverage her contacts and put some funding to kind of really kickstart this. And warm handovers, working with county-wide partners, which is basically people coming in, telling their story once to a partner, and then they can be handed over without having to tell the same story over and over. Got Jumpstart January, which is going on right now, where Sarah's been able to provide some funding for just to make it really pop for us. We've got a project coming up with our MPO program Block, which is going to be a choir for people who hear voices. Sarah's working on a brand new wellbeing strategy, and actually COVID support. Sarah and her expertise has really helped us during COVID as well for our colleagues, because it's been so, as everyone knows, it's been tough going. Next slide, please. So I suppose it's what I've called here the art of the possible, really. So this funding has provided us such an amazing track record. It opens up all kinds of possibilities. You know, we've shown that we are trusted. We can do this. Give us money, we'll do good things with it. So we put in a bid with the Realising Ambitions Fund from the CCGs, and we have now got our Me, Myself and Baby Perinatal Mental Health Project. And we have recruited someone called Ruth Sparshot, who runs that service, and it just makes my heart all big. It's just amazing, you know. It's really providing something that is a gap in Suffolk. You know, we had lots of mums and some dads come to us, and they're not high enough for clinical intervention. There's nothing else. So I feel we're really filling a gap there. And I've used Move It as an example, where we got some more funding and we're providing sports equipment that you can loan from our libraries. So it's really amazing. You know, it could be tennis rackets, it can be those swing ball sets, anything, just to get people moving, because we know that physical health is linked to mental health. And Sarah also works with local libraries on smaller bids as well. So lots of these come through Suffolk Community Foundation. So it could be £500, could be £1,000, and it's just like really lovely ideas spread all around the county that they just want to run with. And of course, more strategic conversations with our CCGs, they're the ones with the money. And then also we're looking at a potential new post. We've got a new library build coming, which is part of the One Public Estate in Mildenhall in Suffolk, where we're going to be in this big shared space. And we're looking at someone to come in that has more of a well-being aspect, still library, but also well-being. So we're hoping the CCG will fund that. So fingers crossed, they're making really good noises. So we'll see. Next slide, please. So we do track impact. So you're probably familiar, because we've been banging on about this in Suffolk, which is our impact study with Moore Kingston Smith, which was return on investment, and the open space model was part of that. That can be found on our website if you're interested in that. We commissioned the McPinn Foundation to also look into open space as well. And we gather qualitative data, rich stories, we take in feedback, but also taking on feedback and suggestions from service users, which, you know, arguably is the most important thing. We have to make sure that we keep bringing everything back around to people who need it the most, really. And all this evidence just cements our assertion that library-based mental health and wellbeing models work, and actually we can probably do more. So I think this is my final slide. Coming up, yes, and I just want to leave you on a quote, and this is from our Me, Myself and Baby service. I won't read it out, I'll just leave it there for you to have a look at, and this just underlines exactly why we do what we do. You know, it's so important. We are there for people, and we have filled a need. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I'll let people just read there. And one thing that jumps out from that, particularly from that quote as well, is having worked in the looked after children's sector previously. And it's not about costs, and it can't be just about costs. It's about people's experience, but the cost to local authorities and to the taxpayer of where young parents particularly are failed to be supported, and then the children end up within local authority and government care. The cost is absolutely extortionate, and then the impact on the young people of that, and all that kind of all of those subsequent impacts is just enormous. So this kind of thing about supporting young parents particularly is just incredible. And thank you as well. That one thing that kind of just really wanted to highlight from that as well is that it really does fit, I think, in terms of what we're trying to say with the model as to really identifying the outcomes that communities need, identifying the gaps and the resources that communities need, and then working out how we can fill them, but not fill them in a way where, for example, in health, we're not trying to replace the NHS. What we're trying to do is support libraries to do what Crystal's doing of being that pre-frontline service, the universal service that stops people getting into the NHS or gets them into the right place in the NHS, but make sure that we're able to kind of do that preventative service, I suppose. In terms of questions for Crystal, I think I'm conscious that Crystal has another meeting to go to at 2 o'clock. So what I was going to suggest was, Crystal, would you be available at some point for a Q&A session on the income generation network? And we can set that up and then have that kind of thing. And you might want to invite Sarah along as well to that. And we will then, sorry, we've just got a chat thing as well. Oh yes, it's a lovely feedback in the chat as well. So thank you, Crystal, and we'll look forward to welcoming you to the Income Generation Network at some point to have that discussion as well. And I'm just going to reshare the Fab. So returning back to the structured activities around the model, which will explore all of those areas, what we would like to do is to attempt what we feel might be a little bit of a grand experiment of doing a workshop session with what seems to be quite a large number of people. So what we will be doing is splitting you into 4 groups, and we'll go into breakout rooms. Within those groups, we've chosen 3 sections for this exercise, 4 sections in fact for the exercise: employment, health, connectivity, and culture. Anyone who's in the health group has obviously got a bit of a head start, having just seen that from Crystal as well. But what we'll be doing particularly within those groups is looking at what we're seeking to achieve for our communities, and then identifying the networks, partnerships, and stakeholders around that. The people on our Pathfinder group for future funding have done this exercise before, and it worked really well with those small numbers, and we're hoping that it'll work with larger numbers as well. So in a minute, we're going to go into our breakout rooms, and then me, Debbie, and Victoria, the future funding team, will come into those rooms and paste a link in the chat. If you click on that link, it will take you to a Google document, and you can then start typing straight into that ideas around what the outcomes are, what the networks and partnerships and stakeholders are as well. So we'll have 10 minutes for that, and after 10 minutes I'm going to come into the room, and then we'll start, we'll ask you to look at what the ideas to achieve those outcomes are, using those networks, partnerships and stakeholders. So for the first 10 minutes we're going to go into the breakout rooms and focus on those 2 things. What are the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve for our communities, and what are the networks, partnerships and stakeholders who are essentially kind of already kind of part of that as well. If anyone doesn't have access to Google Docs, or anyone struggles to get onto those Google Doc links, then you can always just comment through the chat within your breakout room, and then one of the other people within the room can then support taking that across. What we will need to do, and this is a bit of an exercise in emergent leadership, is identify someone within your group to then feed back to everyone else afterwards. So you'll have some time to think about that, but we'll get you straight into the groups now. That's virtually everyone. So thank you for that. We can see the Google documents as well. There's so much on there. That's absolutely brilliant. And what we'll do is we'll start to bring that into the toolkit and start to add that to the breakdown of the model behind it as well. So thank you for that. But first of all, can we have some feedback from the different groups? So can we start with employment? So just a couple of minutes about what your big idea was, what the kind of the big outcomes it met, and the critical outcomes it met, and what stakeholders it met as well.
Yikes! You've got great. And I'm a bit staggered that North Yorkshire's IT let me do all this. So start with a big idea. Big idea. We came up with informal peer support groups in libraries. So sort of moving away a little bit from the formal sort of job club to people who were less confident, etc., and may just want somebody to talk to, and allowing sharing of ideas and expertise. So would need some facilitation, and also talked around training for library staff in dealing with inquiries, signposting referrals, and a national advocacy role. So working completely backwards. Would also be looking at around employment generally, the LEPs, job centres, recruitment agencies, basically anybody who's got anything to do with employment or employment skills, so colleges, even banks, charities, placements, etc. So providing opportunities. And outcomes wanted sort of self-reliance, self-reliability, independent financially, empowering people, stronger communities, confidence to play an active role in society, so creating opportunities, and then trust and confidentiality with using libraries, space in libraries. So those aren't outcomes particularly, but things we would be looking we can offer. So I think, is that a very quick rundown for you?
Yes, that's perfect.
Hopefully covered most.
That's perfect, thank you. And I suppose one other question, which I'd kind of not thought about asking earlier, which I probably should have, how do you think we could approach that? Should we be approaching that as individual library services, or should we be looking at regionally, or should we be looking at some kind of national approach?
I think I'm going to say, do you want to ask that question, or do you want me to put it in the chat? We were talking on both levels, because recognizing that, you know, different services and different localities have different needs or different levels of partnership available. So I think but we definitely had national advocacy down on the list there. So a bit of both.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. And I hope you're not too wet at the moment in North Yorkshire as well.
Got a temporary lake at the bottom of the garden, but apart from that, no at the other side.
Thank you. Now, who's feeding back from the education group?
That's me, Emma, and we didn't have a big idea in our group. We've come up with lots of ideas, so I will just change screen and then I can feed back to you. 1 second. So the main thing that came out for us was the impact of COVID, actually, and the huge impact that this has had on the education of our children, but also of babies and toddlers who've really suffered from not being able to have that social interaction during the period of lockdown and due to the restrictions that have been placed. So we felt that this was an area that libraries really can make a contribution to. So picking up the needs of children from their lack of schooling. Tabitha mentioned, of course, over the summer holidays, we normally have the summer reading challenge, which picks up that gap from 6 weeks of not reading. And of course, this has gone on for almost a year now. So there's a huge need there, isn't there? And so across the board, there's a lot of opportunities for us to plug in to that. And then we talked about the stakeholders. Of course, there's many, so ranging from we think about the babies and the toddlers, so health visitors, midwives, colleagues in early years settings, and then thinking of the school-age children, of course, it's the primary and secondary schools, colleges and universities, and also other people like parents, and also community education providers and others in the third sector as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And then in terms of, I suppose, again, kind of in terms of how we could start to develop that, whether that is something that individual libraries should be developing their own strategies for, or whether there could be a coordinated national approach, or even a mixture of the two, where some template activities were developed by regions or individual libraries that were then shared?
Yeah, we didn't have any sort of discussion about that in our group, but I think that we all felt that this was something that we should be working towards. So any help the Libraries Connectives can give to that to give a sort of coherent national message would be welcome, I'm sure.
Brilliant, fantastic, thank you. And yes, looks very sunny in San Francisco as well.
It is.
Congratulations on the new president.
Thank you.
So who's feeding back from the health group?
That's me. Hello.
Okay.
One idea, too many. We had a few. So the one that we particularly liked was actually nicked from Crystal and Suffolk. We really like the idea of loaning sports equipment and making that available to communities. So linking in around physical activity and partnering over that. So that's a stolen idea. And then our other big idea was really cashing in and making the most of our role as libraries. So we had a lot of examples of authorities working with public health in a really wide range of ways, actually. Some around really concrete outcomes and some more loosely being kind of jointly funded or sitting within public health. An example of a public health library being run by the public libraries. So a really broad range. And we like the idea of us really leveraging our skills and strengths and brand as a library and provider of information, advice and guidance, and really supporting people to go to the right place, signposting, getting them to the right information, to the right resources that are safe and accurate and give them the best outcome. So yeah, we're sticking with being librarians for a change.
Brilliant, fantastic. And while that probably, yeah, again, it feels like there's scope for both local development, regional development, and national support and development as well with that as well.
Yeah, I think what struck me was the different ways in which the different authorities are partnering with public health, some to better effect than others, I think. And yeah, definitely some national advocacy around that, I think would be really helpful. There's a huge opportunity there. I think public health is a really good fit for us. It's that kind of light touch early intervention. And I don't think there isn't one model. There were about 10 to 15 in our room, so probably 30 to 40 in this group altogether. Yeah, I think that would be really significant. The other thing that we talked about was that quite often it is expected that libraries will deliver that service, that signposting service, as part of our existing offer. And so you have to add value to what you're doing in order to leverage income for that. So there was talk of proof of concept and piloting things, showing how you are adding value, what you are doing, what additionality you have, rather than just this kind of pretty consistent expectation that libraries will just do this.
Yes, yeah. It kind of, in some ways, it feels like health is almost the easiest way to be able to define and evaluate social impact, but then also possibly the most complicated as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not sure we're certainly, I'll speak for Worcestershire, I don't think we're always as good as we could be about demonstrating those health impacts, because although we're quite good at sort of social impact, but some of those slightly harder health impacts are, it's another step on, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So who's feeding back from the culture room?
That will be me. Hello, everybody. Michelle Murphy, Acting Head of Service in Hertfordshire. So I think it's fair to say we took a little time to warm up to the task in hand. So one of the things that we probably identified as perhaps a big challenge, not necessarily a big idea, but it's around our role as libraries in building up people's confidence post-COVID to actually engage in physical activities again. And obviously we were looking at culture, so those actually engaging in being in spaces, in public spaces with other people, and what our role is as a library. We talked about how libraries have the opportunity for people to accidentally have a cultural experience. So it's not necessarily a purposive visit to a theatre or something like that, that actually we can promote cultural experiences in that safe space that people might be starting to come back to. How we then link that with leveraging the income, of course, and events and activities are a minefield, as I'm sure we've all experienced. So we did have a discussion around those established festivals that go on up and down the country, and where the library's role was in joining in with a bigger festival, but maybe having a local angle, or helping the local community access some of what was going on in a bigger sort of area. Also smaller projects about touching the physical again, so actually some things that would actually get people to engage and be tactile again, which of course we've lost over the last year. So in terms of the income angle and what you're asking, Ian, which is around what's the national advocacy role, I think as with everything, any kind of advocacy that Libraries Connected we can join together to do would be very helpful. But we've each got those local forums, those local cultural officer forums that we would be presumably having these discussions in. So there's an element about what we can do locally, but then what is the fit and the role of Libraries Connected nationally to do that. So not necessarily some solutions, but we'd only really just started to get warmed up with having the discussion, if I'm honest.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I'm really conscious that it's a short time to throw you into kind of coming up with complete defined solutions. But it was more just, the reason we wanted to go through that was really about the starting to explore together that kind of how we can start to use that model and how that model fits with the services we might be able to offer. And I hope it's been really helpful. So I'm just going to shift on. I'm conscious that we've got a minute left. So I'll shift on quickly to the final slide. So thank you so much for doing all of that, and for engaging so well with that, and for providing all of those ideas as well. So in terms of next steps, before we talk about this, next steps for us behind the scenes will be, we will share around those Google Sheets, so you can keep those links, but we'll send them out as well. But what we'll do is we'll take the detail of that and start to put it into our model behind the scenes. And we do have essentially the strategic toolkit, which is available, and that's where it's going to start to fit in there. So I'll send that round with the kind of as a follow-up to this as well. So all of that information will be collected and will start to form part of the detail of this model as well. But then next steps for everyone here as well is sort of like, if you're not part of it, join the Income Generation Network, take part in the activities to develop the model and identify opportunities, share case studies and experiences on there. And then if you're able to use this model as we get further down and we've got practical tools coming out of it, if you're able to use it and feedback on it, and feedback where it works and where it doesn't as well, because we might find that those 16 areas of jobs, income, education, those kind of things work really well for Amsterdam's model, but it might not be what we want here. We might want something slightly different in terms of our role as libraries. So feedback on that as well, because it's still an evolving thing. And then the other two things are just to join the other webinars coming up. So they're going to be every Thursday at the same, every other Thursday at the same time. So every fortnight for the next 20 weeks. So there's 10 of them in total. Let us know if there's any other topics you'd like covered, apart from the ones that have been identified already, and we can look at building those in as well. But then also look out for applications to join the Skills Development Programme beginning in August, September this year as well. So those, the Pathfinder group will finish in around June or July. There is a conference planned in the first week of July, which is a full week's conference, virtual conference. So it's just a 2-hour session every day, which hopefully will then kind of allow us to kind of explore some of the themes around that as well. And then following that, we'll be starting the skills development program for 36 people, 3 cohorts of 12 in the late summer. Invitations to the webinars are going through Head of Service Group and the Income Generation Network. So they're the channels to get to it. Do let us know. Oh, yeah, do let us know if there's any other ways that you'd like us to get them out. We haven't put them out publicly just because we felt it was probably helpful to have a focused discussion with the people who could actually look at sort of implementing some of this thing rather than a wider kind of public discussion. But we will be, after the first 3 webinars, we will then start to release the recordings of the webinars publicly as well. So thank you for joining. Look forward to seeing you all on the Income Generation group. And we will get all of this information back out to you through the Income Generation Network, and we'll just send a summary email as well. So thank you, and we'll see you in a fortnight.